Hi, I'm Chrissy Thornton, the President and CEO of Associated Black Charities, and we are so excited to welcome you to our Diane Bell McCoy Equity First Speaker Series, where we highlight professionals who have kept equity in the forefront of their career journeys. And today I am so excited and really just appreciative to have with us Miss Jada McCray. Jada, welcome.
Hello, Chrissy. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, so I am so encouraged by you and your story. I am thrilled at the fact that we get to share it with those who are watching tonight. And so let's dive right into the conversation. Well, I'm going to ask you just one of probably the hardest questions I'll ask today, okay, which is to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, gracious. In what context? There's so much.
We want to know everything you're willing to share.
Everything I'm willing to share. Well, I always say the most interesting about me is I'm a woman of faith and I'm a mother. And I always say that, you know, no matter what career achievements I have, motherhood has been the most rewarding part of my life and the most, it's the thing that I'm most passionate about. And I think that actually feeds into my career. Okay. Because everything that I've ever done is to make the world a little bit better for my children and the space that they have to live and occupy. And so, yes, I'm a woman of faith, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, and in addition to that, I am the COO of BTST Services, which is a mental health agency. I absolutely adore working in mental health. I love it. It is a passion of mine. I started working as a social worker in, I think, 2001. Was my first mental health job. It was prior to me having my degrees and my licensures and all of that, but I always feel like social workers are born. They're not made. So it's something that's in you, a desire to help people, a desire to make a change in your community. And I started off there as a social worker and at a PRP firm, a psychiatric rehabilitation program. And there I just really just started working with families and seeing the dysfunction in families and realizing that if you were to insert a disruptor to that you could really change and change generations. And it took off from there. It just absolutely took my heart. And it led me all the way here as the COO of BTST Services and one of the owners of BTST Services, where we provide mental health services for I think last total was over 7,000 people across the state of Maryland. We have offices in Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Washington County, Frederick County, and it's just been an amazing journey. So I think that's the short of me.
Yes.
That's the short, the little bit of my career. There's a lot of other things that I do, but I say that would be me in short, things of note.
And of course, we want to know a little bit more. So okay. I know you're from Baltimore.
Yes.
We want to hear a little bit about your story, your origins, how you grew up, where you grew up, and then how that took you from those beginnings into being the career professional you are now.
I think that's part of the reason why I have a passion for helping people. I let people know whenever they ask about Baltimore, they always reference The Wire. And I always say, yes, where they filmed that, I was born directly across the street from there.
East side, right?
Yeah. I moved to the east side later. Okay. I always wonder, like, should I claim the east side or the west side? Because I was born on the west side, okay, but I grew up on the east side. Okay. And so I let people know that it's a reality, and everything that you hear about Baltimore, about the substance abuse, the teenage pregnancies, the violence that you hear about Baltimore had an impact and effect on my family. And so everything that the city could throw at me, mm-hmm, it has thrown at me and my family. And I always think about how blessed we are that we've overcome all of that. I'm a military brat, I'm an Army brat. And so when I was about 4 years old, my dad joined the Army and we moved to other places in the country. We lived in Oklahoma, North Carolina. Wow. Yeah, at one point he went to Korea and we came back here for a little bit and we just lived a bunch of other different places, and we were able to see how people live differently. And I grew up sheltered on an Army base. Now, Army bases have their own issues, and there are social workers on Army bases for a reason, because when men are being shipped out to fight wars that we never hear about, the things that don't make the news, and they come back with a lot of baggage. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the families on the Army bases were impacted by that, and my family was no different. But there's a certain security that happens on an Army base. I'm a person of order. There's a lot of order on an Army base. There's a way that children behave. There's a way that people behave in schools. There's a way that people behave just on the base itself. There's a lot of order there. When we came back to Baltimore when I was about 9 years old, it was a culture shock.
Okay.
So going from the order and structure of the Army base to coming back to Baltimore, and by then it was the height of the crack epidemic, mm-hmm, the heroin epidemic in particular in Baltimore, and it was not the place that I left.
Okay.
And
what was that like, though, to come back? Now you're not on the base, right? You're in the community. What was that like for your family?
I remember I wrote a letter to my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Laney, and I said, Mrs. Laney, the kids here are misbehaving in class, because I was a teacher's pet. The kids here are misbehaving in class. The teachers are yelling at the students. It was just pretty much chaos for me. And I couldn't make sense of the chaos that was in the school, because school had always been a place that I absolutely loved. I loved to learn. I loved and I adored it. And I thought, well, how can people learn in this much chaos? And even going to school and walking to school we came back and I stayed with my aunt for a bit. Even going and walking to school was a new level of danger that I didn't have before. Because when you live on a military base, we were able to kind of just roam free. It was one of those, you leave out of the house in the morning and you and your friends play, and so somebody's hungry, thirsty, or tired, and then you go back home. But it was a different level of danger that I had to learn how to navigate in Baltimore. And so it was really shocking for me. But one of the best things that came out of that was she wrote me back. And she said, no matter how everyone else is behaving, you continue to be who you are, Jada,
wow.
And that's enough.
And that's something you've held on to. Clearly, you remember that.
I'm
you
about
remember
to tear
her.
Thinking about it, yes. And I've always remembered that. So no matter what room I walk in, no matter what door I walk into, I always remember that I have to continue to be myself no matter what, because that's enough.
And so when you were little Jada, living in Baltimore, what did you want to be? What were your hopes for yourself and your life? And
It's so interesting because I thought about this one day. Someone had said, had asked me that when I was a little girl, and I remember thinking, I want to be a child psychiatrist. I don't know where I got that from, or where I thought about that, or where maybe I heard it on TV, but it sounded to me like a person helping children. And I had no idea that that's where I would end up. And I remember when I was in middle school, by then we had a counselor, a school counselor, who asked me to be a student mediator. She said, you always seem to be like the negotiator in these situations. Why don't you become a student mediator? And it was just something that was just such a natural fit for me. I'm also I have two best friends. So I'm always in the middle of something. I think I talked to people early. I talked to you before about my husband is Chris, who's my business partner, and my business partner is Chris. And so I'm in the middle of two Chris's all the time with very different dynamics. So I find myself in that space all the time, just being a natural fit for in the middle and finding common ground.
Yes. And so your career journey, you wanted to do that, and where did you go?
Oh,
what did you do?
So I always tell people this career is completely by accident and up to God, because for me to say that I was a focused and driven person and knew exactly what I wanted to do and exactly where I would end up and exactly how it would be a lie.
Okay.
I kind of drifted into this, and I'll tell you why. My family, it was a very, I say we faced a lot of the same situation and difficulties that a lot of other families face. And so when we came back to Baltimore, my father, who had struggled immensely at different points in his life because of his own, just because of his own experiences. And I think that sometimes we have to have the grace to understand that our parents are people before they're your parents.
Sometimes they do the best that they can.
And they do the best that they can. And sometimes the best that they can, it may not be the marker that you've determined what it should be, but it's the best that they can give you. And I've always loved and appreciated my father for that. But he had his own set of challenges, and my parents were married really young and had children really young as well. And so by the time we came back to Baltimore, some of the issues that he faced just kind of went full blown. Okay. And I don't think we'd been back 3 years before my parents separated. Okay. And so again, we went from the safety of the military base to being dropped in the middle of Baltimore City. And it was me, my mother, and my sister, and kind of left to fend for ourselves. And at one point, and God bless my mother, she worked super hard. Every time she had 2 jobs, just trying to take care of us. And we lived in a house on 38th and Greenmount. And the front door, because we didn't have the best landlord, the front door was a back door, and our back door was held together with a wooden bar. And I think about that, how you'll be in these situations where you live on an Army base, which is one of the safest and most secure places that you'll ever be in America, to living off of Greenmount and 38th Street with just a wooden bar between you and whatever dangers are out there.
Yeah, all kinds of danger and circumstances and bad influences, and you survived that.
And we survived.
So that is amazing. Yeah. So you already mentioned one, your 4th grade teacher. Who are your other mentors, and how have they affected your life?
Oh my goodness, my mother has been the biggest, she's been the absolute biggest influence on my life. She is, I just think about opportunities for women in America, and Black women in particular in America, and what we can do if we have the ability to soar. She's smart, she's funny, she's witty, she's sharp. She can make a dollar holler like she is, and she's all of those things. And she's one of those people, when she comes into the room, she's there. Her presence is felt. She's so dynamic. And I think that seeing her what she's overcome, because again, she was also dropped into the middle of the hood with 2 children that she had to take care of, and she was a housewife before, and seeing her get a job and take us out of that situation, it took us about a decade to overcome that situation, for her to buy a house, and something that we take for granted. I'm sure this morning when you went out of your door and you started your car and you kept going, for us to not have a car. And for her to pull herself literally, you know how you hear the myth of Horatio Alger, how he pulled himself up from his bootstraps.
Yes.
What's under your bootstraps? Because that's what my mother had to do. She had to pull herself from under the bootstraps. And she got to a point where the American dream, where she had home ownership, she had a car, she had stable employment. And watching her do that made me think, if she could do it, I could do it too. So she is my shero.
Amazing.
She is.
So one of the things we haven't yet mentioned is that you all did all of this and overcame all of these circumstances while Black.
Yes.
And so I'd love to know a little bit more about how being Black factors into your life and the equation, and how race has shown up as either a barrier for you, or how it has showed up in advantageous ways for you. But how has it been a part of your life?
I think that being a Black woman in America and being aware of your Blackness, it's an evolution that happens over time. So I grew up in a Black family, in a Black neighborhood before I was 4, before we went to the Army base. And I remembered, this was the 80s, and so we got to the Army base, and my mother's like, okay, go to the playground, because you remember, Chrissy, back then you could go to the playground by yourself.
Yes,
And
not anymore.
Not anymore. I'm
Right.
like, you go into the front door, let me watch the camera.
That's,
you know?
that's even when they're older.
Yeah.
I have a 17-year-old, and he barely is going
I'm
anywhere
tracking
now.
everybody in my house.
Exactly.
Everybody with your device. Drop me your location all the time. And so I went to the playground by myself, and I remembered, you're a little kid and you want to play. And there were some other children there. They were Hispanic, and they were pointing to me, and they were saying, "Caca, caca." I had no idea. I was like, well, why won't they play? And I didn't know what they were saying. I just knew it wasn't good. And I found out later that caca was the word for poop. They were pointing to my skin and calling me poop.
Yes.
I remembered that, and it stuck with me, and I remember that was the first time that I ever felt other. And then indifferent. And growing up on an Army base, there's all kinds of different racism. There's something that you just kind of accept. But the difference is everyone there is there for the same cause.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain, we all just kind of were there together. It was a certain community there that no matter what, all of our dads or moms were fighting the same fight. And so there was kind of a cause there. That we could kind of rally behind. And there were different factions within that, and that was fine, and we understood it. But I'd say when I was about 4 or 5, that was the first time that I ever really knew that there was an otherness to me. Coming back to Baltimore again, where we were all Black here for the majority, and seeing the despair was another time where I felt like there's a difference. So being on the Army base where there's diversity and there's a different quality of life, again, coming back and then being in poverty, there's a certain shame that comes with poverty. When you live in a capitalistic society. So there's a certain shame that comes with it. Like, what did we do to deserve this? What did we do for us to have to live this way? We were just fine. And it's all of us here together. And then there's a different attitude that comes in poverty as well, too. A different shame, a different attitude. And there's a shared shame amongst the other people who are living around you as well. And that was another feeling like, okay, this is the difference. We're all Black here. And so this is the difference from other people who are experiencing things a certain way. So you can understand how those two things are confused. That Black equals poverty and equals shame.
Or struggle. Yes.
And an attachment to a struggle. And those two things being separate. And so when I say there's an evolution, I almost had to learn how to tweeze those things apart. My Blackness does not equal struggle.
Yes.
My Blackness does not equal shame. My Blackness does not equal poverty. My Blackness is who I am based on my ancestry. And it's also something that I've learned to be immensely, is proud the right word? Because I think that pride is one of those things. What is the word for it? I would say that it's almost like
It's definitely a driving force sometimes, right?
But almost like a loving embrace of it. Just almost like something that my Blackness needs to be cared for and nurtured and appreciated and loved. And it's one of those things, I'm always a fan of the underdog, and I'm going to root for the underdog. So the thing that society finds to be despicable or decides to be undesirable is the thing that I feel like I need to show love and compassion for all the more.
Even within yourself.
Yeah, even within myself.
Wow.
So I absolutely love being a Black woman. And it's not in a disparagement to anyone else. It's just that this is the form that God chose for me to show up in the earth as. He could have created me to be anything. And he said, the earth needs a Jada, and she needs to be a black woman.
Yes.
And so I got to respect his decision and love it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So now let's talk a little bit and we'll learn more about your organization and your services. But interestingly enough, you're part of an organization that you help to put together, you envision, and it's black owned.
Yeah, it's black
But
owned.
I'm sure even within that, race plays a factor, and certainly prior to being a part of that organization, maybe in your career, race has played a factor. How has race showed up in your professional journey?
So I've worked other places before. Before I met my business partner, Chris, one of the things that I did was help to build clinics. And so I'd go in on the ground floor with other people, and I would give it my all, because I don't do things halfway. If I'm gonna do it, if I'm in it, I'm in it. And so I'm giving it 100%, and I would help build those things. All of those things were not owned by black people. And so the last place that I worked prior to working with Chris Simon, my business partner, I knew that there was only so far that I could go. Okay. And these are people that I started working with maybe a decade before, and we started in the same place. And I saw, it's not that my career stunted, but they were owners. And there's a difference with ownership and talent. You can be talent, but talent is not always ownership. And so a lot of times people in ownership don't want to give the same benefits to talent that they have. They just want to, and it's their right, they want to extract everything that you have to give. And they want to take ownership
and benefit from it
and take ownership of your talent. But it's not yours.
Yes.
And so I had the opportunity. I'll skip over some of the rough parts of that story because it wasn't pretty. Okay. But it was time to go. Let's just say this. I'm one of those people, I'm a very loyal person, and it takes a lot for me to leave a situation. And by the time it was over, I felt like I had a rash and I had on a wet, itchy wool sweater. Like, I got to get this off of me. I had to take it off of me. And by the time I joined Chris, I was ready to, I always say I joined Chris's war and I became a general. And that's how I felt. I felt like taking it on with him. And I had so much. He started BTST services, and I believe 2012 is a mentorship program. And so by the time I came on in about 2015, 2016, he'd been going through some things. And I saw this black man and how he'd worked so hard to bring this vision to life. And I saw the barriers that he was up against. And I saw all of the, the trials and the things that he would try to do and the things that he would implement and how far he had come himself. And I had a great admiration for that. He has a lot of determination and big vision. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to take what I've learned here and I'm going to help this black man grow this huge vision. And we're going to see how far it can take us. And when we joined forces, I would say it's like a nuclear blast, like something went, and it just blew up. And it was almost instantaneous, the success that we had. And so I was just so happy to be able to do that, to give it to my all to someone who had a true appreciation for it. And not just appreciation for my talents, but also a respect for it as well. And he was, out of all the other people who were willing to utilize my talents for their own purposes, he said, would you like to be my partner?
Wow. So he offered you a semblance of ownership that you were looking for, which I think this is important to this conversation because so many times we become depleted in our gifts, in our ministry, and hand it out and let everyone else deplete us. And it is so different. One of the things I tell people all the time is now working at Associated Black Charities, it's a different world for me. I built my career predominantly in white spaces. And I tell people that I didn't know I wasn't free. So that's that example you gave of taking it off. Like I didn't know how bad it was until I removed myself. And then when I look back, there were things that were happening to me specifically because of race that I couldn't believe that I had endured.
And it's a feeling like I don't think that people always take into consideration. And I always have to have a little bit of compassion. And I know this sounds really counterintuitive, especially the space that we're speaking in, counterintuitive. I have to have compassion for some of our white counterparts in America. And I say this because we are all socialized and conditioned to believe and think a certain way. And so a lot of times people don't have a nefarious intent. It's just a sense of the way that our worldview is shaped can compromise us seeing other people as full human beings.
Yeah, and it's not always the people, it's the systems. It's the structures that are built.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. So I appreciate you adding that.
Once I had that shift in my brain and I realized that a lot of us, and ourselves included, are a condition of our social functioning. Our function as a result of our social conditioning, it literally changes the way and the view in which you see the world. It changes how you see the world. It changes how you see people. It changes your interaction with people, but it also changes how you see yourself as well. And so, again, I don't think that I was seen as talent. And so in a certain way, like you have NFL owners and they'll have or basketball, owners that they have, and they'll look at the people on their teams and they'll see them as talent. They don't see them as ownership. So they want to use them and use their talent and use their fame and all of these things to bring attention to their organization. And when it's time to leave or they want to make a move for themselves, it's like, well, how dare you? Was I not good enough to you?
Right.
Did I not treat you well?
I gave you the little crumbs
Yeah.
and that wasn't good enough for you.
And what you want to say is, yeah, but I'm worthy of dignity and respect, and I can forge my own path in life, and I have the ability to do that, and you don't have the right to stop me from making the decision that's best for myself.
So let's talk a little bit about BTST.
Okay.
And from a number of different angles. We want to know more about the work,
Okay.
what you all do, how you service the community, and then let's talk about it from an equity lens and how equity factors into the work that you do and why that part of your job is so important to you.
So I think it's interesting whenever I show up in a space. And I say that because I don't think that people always expect for me to show up. Because everywhere I go, I bring me with me. And I think that there's a certain jadedness that's not going to compromise. Jadedness. And
Okay.
I've had to make peace with the jadedness, okay? Because the jadedness doesn't have a mask. The jadedness doesn't have a, so whatever I'm thinking, you're probably going to know. And there's a certain passion that I have that's not always welcome in leadership spaces unless that passion is harnessed for the things that people want it to be harnessed for. But I have a different calling in a different direction that I have to serve. And so if God has given me a passion to advocate for these people, well, who's going to stop me? Who's going to shut me up? And I can't do that. I'm very clear about the things that I believe to be right and wrong and morally right and wrong. And I'm not able to compromise those things. So at BTST, I'm one of the owners and I'm the COO. Again, I joined Chris Simon there. He's the CEO and founder of BTST Services, and I came on board as the Chief Operating Officer at BTST. And so there, I think the thing that I've done the most, and Chris will tell you this too, was that I'm a very ordered and organized systems person. Mm-hmm. Organized is not the right word, because if you look in my dresser drawer, you'd be like, honey, this is not organization. But I have a really strong sense of order and how systems should work and how things should be modified to make them as easy, replicatable, duplicatable, sustainable, efficient as possible. Yes. And I can usually cut through the foolishness and bull. And so if you have something in place, and let's just say, Chris, I'll say this because Chris will share it too. Before I came on board, they didn't have a vacation policy. He was like, oh no, go on vacation. When you come back, I think, you'll do a good job. He's very, he's the most relaxed and chill, laid back person you can be, but he's also on hyperdrive. And so as long as you're working hard, he doesn't have an issue with that. Well, you can imagine for a person who likes order, you're going on vacation whenever you decide to go on vacation, it's not going to work for me.
Right, right.
And so
you need structure.
I need structure. I need to know when you're coming in. I need to know when you're going out. I need to know what the expectations are and the things that I can count on. But so you can imagine when I came on board at BTSD, I was not the most popular person. I was not the most popular person because it was almost like, well, who's this, for lack of a better way to put it, who's the stepmother? I was like an evil stepmother. Like, oh no, this is your lunch break and this is this and this is that and this is the new policy for this. We're going to do this way and we need a written policy for it and we need a written policy for that and all of those things because that is how you function. But I do that out of fairness because if everybody knows what the expectation is, then there's no wiggle room for you to be taken advantage of in any way or for you to take advantage of the company anyway. So I always want to make sure that the expectations are clear and that if it's something, as far as it could be something as simple as your quarterly report or your evaluation. I don't want there to be room for a qualitative assessment
subjective.
in there. I want it to be, I want to say, well, these were your numbers. And this is where you met, and this is where you exceeded. And not it's because, Jada likes me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, because I like everybody.
So you guys, I'm assuming, serve the Black community?
Absolutely.
Possibly predominantly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a diverse population that we provide mental health services for Medicaid population.
Okay.
And so in Baltimore, it's predominantly Black. But people forget the issues of impoverished people.
It transcends
race,
absolutely.
And it's really, a lot of it is the same. Again, we're socialized to believe that it's different, but poverty, the issues of poverty, it spans across color. So maybe in Washington County, our population is a little more rural, and that may trend more white. Okay. Or in Frederick, there's a Hispanic population that we service. But again, poverty is poverty, and so we are providing services to help uplift and and stabilize people who are in tough situations.
So a lot of our work here at Associated Black Charities is meant to empower Black people, Black families, and the Black community, specifically around business ownership, generation of wealth. We're talking about access to capital and really having the opportunity to be successful and to thrive and to start to break down some of the barriers that have been created by structural racism. Now, I know you're thriving at BTST. You also have some other endeavors.
Yes.
We want to learn about those, and then also know how, if in any way, racism has impacted your journey to access to the American dream and those things.
Well, one of the biggest things that I can say, I'll get to the other things that we do, but one of the primary things that we can do, that we're doing right now, as far as equity is concerned, is real estate.
Okay.
So in America, there's nothing you can do without ownership. And ownership of land, it has always been paramount in America. And you can own a lot of things. You can have cars, you can have jewelry, you can have nice clothes and bags. But if you don't own land, you don't own anything in America. And part of that is in World War II, our grandfathers and great grandfathers, Black, they went off to fight the war and they came back and they were discriminated against. And one of the ways they were discriminated against was the GI Bill. And they were not allowed to buy property, and redlining and all of those things that prevented us from having property. And so you hear a lot of other people say, well, you know, my grandfather was an immigrant and he came to this country from Sicily and he managed to buy these houses and start this business. Well, he had access to be able to buy property and we were not afforded those things. And so I just think it's a shame that people who fought for their countries and used their bodies to fight for the liberties and freedoms of this country were not able to then enjoy those freedoms that they fought for. And one of those was the GI Bill that allowed them access to purchase homes. And so that starts off then, that's World War II. And those homes that they were able to purchase then, they were then able to sell those homes for a greater value and give that money to their children, pay for education, take out loans against those properties, where those properties continue to appreciate over time. And so I always think of homes and property as little banks sitting there for you to be able to utilize the appreciation value to do different things and fund different things. Our second home that my husband and I bought, our second family home, I found that it was interesting. They had 5 children in that home, and they were able to take the equity out of that home to be able to pay for each and every one of those children to go to college. Wow. And when we were negotiating the price, they had a floor that they could not go beneath this amount that they were selling it for, because they had to pay off those home equity loans that they used for their children to go to college. And then they were going to downsize, get themselves a nice little house and travel. That's what their plan was. And I thought about that. When it came time for me to go to college, my mother couldn't take out a home equity loan.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
She wasn't able to extract money from her house to be able to take out a loan for us, for my sister and I to go to school. And I thought about that with my next house that I purchased, the house that I live in right now. And it was the same thing. They'd taken out that money to be able to fund their children to go to private schools, to go to college, to have a nest egg for themselves. And again, they were able to utilize their home as a bank.
Leverage.
It's leverage.
Yes.
Think about how many of us, Black people, who were not able to do that. And you give your children a start in life, so they don't have to worry. They don't have to take out student loans and be $250,000 in debt and work and slave to pay off debt just so that they can get a job and have an entry-level job in the market. They don't have to do that. Their children didn't have to do that. And so you think about that. What happens when you can start yourself off, again, like my mother, from beneath the bootstraps? What happens when you can actually start yourself off benefited? You have an education that you didn't have to pay for, and you don't have debt. And you can literally, when we talk about equity, that's what we mean.
Yes, you're building from somewhere, from a starting point.
From
I used to work with a young lady. We were the same age, and it was just part of her family tradition that she and her siblings, when they graduated high school, the parents provided them with a home paid in full. And so she never paid rent. She never paid interest. She never had some of those barriers that, I had. We were the same exact age. And it is just really miraculous to sit back and think about just the disparity in opportunity.
Absolutely.
Right?
So again, when I talk about my mother, who's my shero, and I think about what if she'd had that opportunity to have access to free education, because essentially it becomes free. What if she'd had the opportunity to be able to have ownership and be able to have leverage and be able to do different things that were of interest to her and invest in different things? What if she'd had that opportunity? What would she have been able to do? And so that was one of my first awakenings when I realized that that property is the most important thing, and everything that we do should drive purchasing property and acquiring property.
Okay. And you're doing that?
I'm doing that.
Okay. Okay.
With my husband. So I got to say this, my husband, and he is the nuts and bolts person for our real estate operation. He's the person who he keeps that train chugging down the track. Because if it were me, I would be. Let's just say I'm not as organized as he is in that way.
Okay, okay.
And he's very good. I said this before. He's very good creatively. So he's an abstract thinker, but he's also a very concrete thinker as well too. So if you can imagine those two sides of the hemisphere working together to be able to see something and envision something that's in the community, and then also being able to put fact to it as well and say, this makes sense. So this, I can see this looking a certain way, but the evidence and the numbers also support the growth in this way. That's a beautiful thing.
He's building an empire.
He's building an
empire.
Yeah.
Well, talk to us about some of your other endeavors, because now we got you working full time.
Yeah.
We got you doing real estate investment and property management and all that. What else do you have on your plate?
I do sleep though.
Okay.
So right now, but this is where the beauty of partnerships come into play.
Okay.
And so we have a group of partners that we invest in, Outcrowd Restaurant Group, where we opened up a restaurant, Black Swan.
Okay.
So Black Swan
I love
in Harbor
Black
East.
Swan
You love
now.
Black Swan. I love Black Swan too. So I always tell people, like, as far as Black Swan is concerned, yes, I can read a contract and all of those things. And Chris Simon, who I talked about earlier, with his creativity and his great imagination, it was his vision to do Black Swan. I love to give people their flowers. And I got to tell you, the same way that I'm in awe of my husband's ability as far as real estate is concerned, I'm in awe of Chris's ability to envision a thing, to see a thing that does not exist, and create it and come up with a plan for creation, and also to bring other people's buy-in. So I say that to say, I was not sold on restaurants.
I was going to say, did you see yourself as a restaurateur?
No,
ever?
I worked in restaurants from the time that I was 14 until I was 26. I was done with restaurants. I had 25, I'm sorry. I had no desire to do restaurants ever again in life. But he's very persuasive. And I've told this story before, that I had to go to church because he was like, it would be really great if we could do it. And we started talking about it. And I made the mistake of actually talking about it and engaging in it and getting excited about it.
Oh, you just empowered him to
I empowered him to run even more about it. And so then I went to church and I prayed about it. It was during the pandemic. And I said, God, if this is your will, then I will do it. And I got in the car after I left church, and he called me. He was like, I got this great space in Harbor East. And I was like, okay, God.
Black-owned restaurant in Harbor East, Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
How significant is that?
So I think that I wasn't aware of, I knew that there was a need in Baltimore, because we would travel other places, and the experience, the dining experience in Miami and New York and all of these different places would be phenomenal. And we didn't have that here in Baltimore. We didn't have like a vibe, and this is Chris, a vibe, creating the vibe here, that you can go there where you can enjoy dinner, and it almost feels like a party at dinner, but not quite a party. Just a good vibe and a place that felt welcoming for us and welcoming for our culture. And I think that's the thing that was missing here in Baltimore, a place for Black people to go, to be able to celebrate, to be able to have a good time, and truly authentically be ourselves, and feel like it's ours. And even down to the chicken box. So the thing I will claim in Black Swan is the chicken box.
Was that you?
It was me.
Oh wow! I love how authentic that is to Baltimore.
Like
Sometimes I wondered about that. It's one of my favorite restaurants. But I'm like, oh, they getting real Baltimore-ish on the menu. But I love that.
We can have a Pomodoro, we can have a sea bass, and we can have elevated dining. But I think that for us, we love this place. We love Baltimore. We love our city. And there's so many beautiful parts of the city and the connection. And I think that you have to let people know, just like I said about the compassion and the pride that I have in being Black and the love that I have for being a Black woman, I think it's the same thing for my city. And so whether the rest of the world values Baltimore or not, we value Baltimore. And there's a level of love and pride that we have, and compassion, and the ability and the willingness to pour into this city to make it as beautiful as it can possibly be.
So now I'm going to ask you about Baltimore, but I want to also say that you are also co-owner of the brand new Prim and Proper,
yes.
which is a very elevated dining experience. I've dined there and enjoyed that as well. And you and all of your businesses and your partnerships and your interests are absolutely making Baltimore better.
Thank you.
At the same time, what are your concerns about Baltimore? Specifically, as a racial equity organization, we're always zeroed in on whether or not our communities, Black communities, have access. Are we included? Are we considered? When we're talking about the wonderful things, and there are great things happening in Baltimore, are we bringing the Black community along? We represent just about 70% of the population in Baltimore City. At the same time, we represent about 83% of all of the low-wage workers in Baltimore. So we know there's disparity. We know there's still hardship. I read something recently that said Black men between 44 and 47 are some of the most either underemployed or unemployed. Black people make up over 70% of all of the incarcerated persons in Maryland. So we have some issues. What are your thoughts around all of that in your love for Baltimore and your love of Maryland and also your commitment to making it better?
It goes really, it's not a surface answer. The first thing has got to be included in the conversation and actually included in the decision making are two totally different things. I don't want people to pander to Black people in Baltimore. I don't need you to use a language that you think is enticing to us or visuals that you believe would be enticing to us. It has to be a genuine desire to serve and help our community. And I don't mean enable us, I mean able us to be able to do big and better things for this community because we live here. And for people in Baltimore, I would say it's pride of ownership. This is your city. And so there's no longer room for us to feel as if the powers that be are the only answer. We need to become the powers that be. We need to move and motivate the powers that be to work on our behalf. And it can't just be in election years. It has to be ongoing. And again, I talk about people who immigrate to different parts, and what they do is they take over ownership. Again, Chrissy, it's ownership of a neighborhood. So you'll see a lot of them working together. And then all of a sudden this area becomes Little Italy. Or this area becomes Chinatown, and the first thing they do is they own the neighborhood. They come and they rent, and then they own, and then they'll buy the corner store. And then
now it's enterprise.
Now it's enterprise.
Right there in their
so now they bought the corner store, and now they bought the laundromat, and so it's all enclosed. It's all for their people, and it's fine. Other people are welcome to come in and utilize it, but you know who lives there. Then they get on the school board, they get on the PTA, and so they can move the agenda of their community forward. And so for us, I believe it has to be the same way. Land ownership, investing in the businesses and the neighborhoods that you live in, making sure that there's a presence at your children's school, making sure that there's a presence in the community advocacy and the student council, and not student council, but the city council and all of those things. Making sure that there's an investment to move your agenda forward. And here's the thing, it's okay for Black people to have an agenda. And I think that for so long we would try to downplay that, like, oh, no, we want help for everybody. Of course we do. Of course we want everyone to be benefited, but there are certain needs that we have in our community that need to be met. I don't need, and I'll take it even nationally, I don't need the President of the United States to have rappers at the White House and you think that that's speaking to the Black community. What are you going to put in place? What things are you going to put in place? What policies are you going to put in place to truly empower Black people? How are you going to help us to establish and grow Black businesses? How are you going to help Black education? How are you going to stop mass incarceration? These are the things, what opportunities are you going to have for the little boys that are on the corner right now, and the only thing that they see are drug dealers going by is something that they want to become themselves. That's the thing that they have that's tangible for them. What are you going to do about that? And I don't want to hear the same thing about, community centers. Well, how many, and then what? And then what? What opportunities are you going to have? Concrete things are you going to do to move the Black agenda forward instead of pandering? That's what I'd like to see.
And then also, as you mentioned, not being afraid to talk about it. There's this moment where everyone, all lives matter, right? And we believe that and understand that, but we also know until there's a specific focus on Black people, specifically here in Baltimore, that it will be more weary, more struggle, a hardship for us to be pulled up. So I clearly, I'm here in this role, I'm talking about racial equity all day, every day, so it's easy for me to see myself as a champion of racial justice. I'm like, power to the people. I'm, seeking out mentorship. We have some wonderful advocates on some of the artwork behind us that inspire me daily. With all that you do and how you describe yourself, I've never heard you describe yourself this way, but I'd venture to say that you too are a champion of racial equity. How do you feel about that, and how does that settle with you?
It's fine. Thank you. Thank you that you see that, and I believe that that's in everything that I do. And I would say my desire more than anything for Black people is for us to combat and go against our social conditioning, because from the moment you're conceived in this country, Black children are taught that their lives are not as important. and I say that for maternal and fetal health care. I say that by the foods that are available in our communities. I say that by the access to education that Black children have. I say that with mass incarceration. I say that with our lack of land ownership, with our lack of actual leadership in our communities. You're taught that your life is not as important. And so what I want to pour into each and every, and I had to come to this myself, and I always tell people this came as a result of my spiritual journey as well. I had to start seeing myself the way that God made me. And I had to start appreciating that God never made me inferior to anyone else. That was never his design. That was never his desire. And if anything, if you really read your scripture like you're supposed to, it says that God hates oppression. And so when I realized that, I started to see my Blackness as almost a superpower. I started to see it because, again, from a biblical perspective, God always takes the least of these, or who society believes to be the least of these, and he never asks anybody permission to elevate anyone. He never says, oh, okay, well, Jada's a Black woman. Can I put her in a position of power? He never asked anyone. He decided that that's what he was going to do. And I think that it's because he likes to do the unexpected sometimes. And so I would say that we have to, it sounds almost cliche to say believe in ourselves, but we've got to start seeing ourselves the way that we were created, to be fearfully and wonderfully made, and believe it, and edify ourselves and speak over ourselves in that way. I think you're doing amazing things, Chrissy, and I don't think I would ever skimp on an opportunity to tell you that I believe you're doing amazing things, and I love your boldness, and I love the way that you, again, fiercely, that you are able to speak out without fear. And if you have fear, you don't hide. You hide it very, very well. And that's between you and God, and that's fine. But I think that we have to stop the social conditioning of fear and believe that we can't work together as partners also. Because one of the best blessings that I've had is partnerships. And so when you talk about prim and proper wasn't my idea. It was Janelle Clark. She's a sommelier, and it was her idea. And so what I can do best is support her in her ideas. And we all benefit from that. And again, Chris, I didn't start BTSD services, but what I can see is a person with a great vision, and I can join that. And we can work together to create something absolutely beautiful. Real estate, it's the same thing. Anybody, so if you're willing to partner, I'm willing to partner too. And that's where you have a strong foundation and a strong base. And so for us, see ourselves as being courageous and not being afraid, because we've had other, I think it's been a fear-based thing that we've established even since after slavery, when we were doing so very well and we were building our neighborhoods and building our communities and being in government. And then Jim Crow came along, and you had the mass execution of our people in the South and just brutal racism that stopped a lot of that in our tracks. People were hung from a tree for a reason, to instill fear in you. And so I think that we've got to get our fearlessness back, because it's that important. You know, it requires you almost going against your DNA, and I say that as a therapist, because you know that after horrific events, and I'll call it a certain kind of Holocaust and trauma is written on your DNA, and so you get this close and then you get afraid, and then you step back and you pull back a little bit. But we have to move beyond the trauma that's written into our DNA and walk into fearlessness and say that we can do this.
One of the ways that we do that is in our community has to be through bringing other people along. Those of us who are strong enough to pull someone else along. And I've seen you do that. I've been in spaces and I've seen you extend yourself. You've extended yourself to me. I've seen you specifically with women extend yourself to other people through mentorship, sponsorship, inclusion, opportunities for partnership. So I want to give you, as we start to wind down, the opportunity to talk to the Black community, and really from a lens of where you've come from, because I think that your story is so powerful. Like, I'm sitting here talking to someone who grew up on Greenmount Avenue with barely anything holding the lock on the front door, right? Who sits here as not only a refined, successful professional woman, but someone who's a source of inspiration for many of us who have the blessing of knowing you. What do you say to the community about how you've journeyed and how they can too?
I always held my story close to the vest before, and I didn't want to share it. And then one day in my quiet time, in my prayer time, God said, if you don't share your story, you can't share my glory. And I realized that I had to let people know that if God could do this for me, he can do this for you too. And all he requires is a yes, and a yes for whatever you were created to be. And so for me, it's an advocate for mental health, it's an advocate for Black people, it's an advocate, honestly, for all people, because I feel like if this could happen for me, it can happen for anyone. And I let people know I'm not anything, I mean, I'm special to my
not
family.
special?
Not particularly, no.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I'm kind of quick.
You're not special.
I'm a little quick, you know what I mean? I pick up on things and I'm adaptable and all of those things. But I would have to say the best thing that ever happened to me, it was a spiritual transformation when I realized that I had to be who God created me to be. So if anything, I would say to Black people, be who God created you to be, because he loves you, he cares for you. And he created you with a purpose, because there was something on this earth that required you. And so do your part. There's a position that's open for you, and find it. And if it is building businesses, then you do that. If it is advocacy, then you do that. If it is just being the best friend to people, because people need that too, and having loving relationships and being a decent human being and giving $20 to a person who may be in the grocery store and they don't have it, whatever it is, if your gift is mercy, be merciful. If your gift is boldness, be bold. If your gift is justice, then be just.
Love that.
Whatever it is, find out what that gifting is, because it's what you were created for. Walk in that, do that, and you'll be successful.
Now, what I'm going to tell you, and everyone's going to hear me say this, is when you open the next restaurant or buy the next house, I got $5 on it. I need somebody to call me and put me in, coach, right?
But you know what? You said something that's really important, because you said bring other people along. My husband always says it's an all-volunteer army. So you have to be willing. So whatever it is that's holding you down, you have to be willing to walk a different way and leave it behind.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you just two more things.
Okay.
The first is, talk to us about lessons learned. I mean, God willing, you have much more life to live and journey through, but from the beginning till today, what are the lessons learned that you can maybe give us that might help other people?
I'd say there are certain things that can't be compromised. And certain things are not worth compromising. And so stick to those things. And everyone knows what those things are for them. And it's personal and individual to all of us. There are certain things that I absolutely will not compromise. I just won't. And I found that I've been successful by sticking to my own personal code of ethics. And I'd say the second thing is you can do a lot with a little bit.
Oh, I love that.
So you have to ask yourself, and again, this is a spiritual thing, and I always tell people this, if you think you don't have something, I always remember the parable in the Bible where it's not the parable, but it's a story in the Bible where the disciples are like, Jesus, these people have been following us and we don't have anything for them to eat. We got to let them go. And he says, what do you have? And they said, 2 fish and some loaves of bread. And he gave thanks for those things. He broke them apart, and then it multiplied. So with that, I learned the question that you need to ask yourself is, what do I have? And what you have may be different from what somebody else has. Whatever you have, and Chrissy, in your case, is boldness. Be thankful for it, and then it'll multiply.
Wow.
Your boldness is catching.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You came here to bless me, and I'm supposed to be highlighting how wonderful you are. The last thing is that we would love people, if you are willing to be able to connect with you, your work.
Yeah.
Are there ways that people can get connected to you?
Yeah, I have a couple of them. And the easiest way you can find me on Instagram. It's Meet Jada McCray at Instagram. Meet_Jada McCray on Instagram. Then there's also, I have an email that people can reach out to for different engagements and all that stuff. I think it's also Meet Jada McCray, but I would have to double check with that one. Like I said, organization, 2 different things. Yeah, Jada McCray, J.McCray at BTSD Services is always a good way. I have like 85 email addresses, Chrissy, so yeah, find me on Instagram.
They'll find you.
Find me and follow me on Instagram if you want to see what I'm up to and what I'm doing, and if you want to reach out, it's always great.
Any last thoughts?
I don't know. I always feel like I want to share with people that no matter what you've been through, no matter what you've done, find forgiveness in yourself, and you're beautiful. And just keep moving, and the earth needs you. We need you here to do, and if we could all do our part, this is gonna be a beautiful place.
That is amazing. So thank you so much. Thank you for your willingness. Thank you for your yes in this moment, and for sharing with the constituents of Associated Black Charities. We love you. We appreciate you. We're rooting for you. And we can't wait to see how you will continue to soar, because I know as you soar, you'll bring the rest of us with you.
Come on.
And so thank you for joining the Diane Bell McCoy Equity First Speaker Series. I'm Chrissy Thornton, the President and CEO of Associated Black Charities. Good night.